BBC 5 Live.
Yeah, the real sounds of Africa to once again kick off our World Football Phone-In. And this morning we're talking football in Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. As always, we turn to our African football oracle, Mark Gleeson, our Springboka Junior, who is in Cape Town, I presume. Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Dotton. I'm in Durban today.
Durban, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Addis Ababa. What's the difference?
Exactly, just a couple of 1,000 kilometres in each case.
Yeah. For you lot, that sounds like nothing.
It's around
but
the corner.
For you it may be. For us, it's the other end of the earth, obviously. And the Legendinho Tim Vickery is in, I'm presuming, Rio. Good morning.
You presume right, so you got 50% right, 1 out of 2. Have you had a good time, Yus? Have you had a good time? Yus? It's my little Jim Bowen tribute.
Well done, you've got that in. I can give you a Jim Bowen tribute as well, because I interviewed him years and years ago when it came to the death of, what's his name, Vaughan, who was the guy that did the Roses advert back in the day. Something Vaughan, wasn't it? That he was the guy that behind Bullseye, or not the guy that created Bullseye, but the guy that went into partnership with the guy that created Bullseye. Why are we talking about Bullseye when this is World Football Phone-In?
Sorry, it was my fault. It was my fault.
It's always your fault.
What this is that Robert Frost poem, isn't it? 2 roads diverged in a wood and I got hopelessly lost. I gave you a little road there and you got hopelessly lost down it. Let's stick to football.
But, I shouldn't have taken that road. This is the existential... Norman Vaughan is what I'm thinking of, isn't it? It's Norman Vaughan. Do you remember the Roses advert from when we were kids? Do you remember Roses Grow on You? You don't remember that?
Yeah, I remember the slogan, but I don't remember who Norman Vaughan was. Yeah,
Norman Vaughan. Okay, well, he died after being hit by a car, in any case, in his 70s or something like that, and there was a tribute on 5 Live when I was the voice of death on 5 Live, and Jim Bowen came on. Anyway, that's beside the point. I was going to say, in a road of life, that fork, that crossroads in life, this is a really important point for football, that crossroads in life, where Robert Johnson, the great blues guitarist, went one way and followed the devil when he should have gone the other way. We shouldn't have.
He gave us some good music, though. It was a bargain.
Oh, yeah.
We did well out of it.
Yeah, stack them high and I'll sell them cheap kind of bargain. No. Not that kind of bargain. Anyway, Mark, you probably wonder what all this is about.
I think I've got a general idea. Someone died this week who ran some TV show in the UK, which I'd never seen before, and we certainly know who Robert Johnson is.
Well, there you go.
He's not the oracle for nothing, is
exactly.
He? You give him 1 or 2 scraps and he puts it into a narrative.
Exactly. We wraps it all up in just a sentence or two all the way from Durban, which for those of us who don't know is still in South Africa. He hasn't quite hit the water yet. Let's get back on to... Wow, you said thousands of miles away. I've got to get back to that. Let's go back to Jelani here in New Jersey, actually. Had a question for you both, this week.
And it should be asked.
Yeah, this week was the week of Lionel Messi, the Chelsea manager, saying that, look, he's just out of this world. That's why we got beat in the Champions League, because Lionel Messi is Lionel Messi. But apparently he's everyone's enemy in the World Cup. He's not just the enemy of Brazil. How do you expect him to have an impact on the World Cup coming round, Mark, first of all?
Well, I think it depends on what happens now in the Champions League, how far Barcelona go. But I do think that there's going to be an incredible amount of pressure on him again. This is his last chance really at national team level after all of these failures that he's had in the... there is, I think, still perhaps within him, but still a general feeling out there that, Messi needs success at national team level to sort of complete the circle and to become the bona fide number 1 best footballer we've ever had. I think he's already there, but there is that sense that he's got to do something with Argentina. So he'll go into that World Cup under some pressure, I'm sure. It's definitely a last chance for him at national team level to do something.
And if he's got that pressure... How will he perform then, Tim? Would he perform? Would he raise his game, or will the pressure be too much for him? Because he's never quite achieved it, as Mark was intimating there. He's never quite achieved it at national level as he has done for Barcelona, has he?
No, although he did get them to 3 finals in 3 years. They did lose them all.
Not too bad.
It's
not too bad.
No, it's not. It's not too bad. We'd take it, wouldn't we? I think it's probably dependent on 2 questions. Number one is how fit is he going to be come the end of the season? We saw in the last World Cup that he really was pacing himself, saving himself, and he knew that he just didn't have it in him to control games in the way that he does with Barcelona, increasingly with Barcelona. He's just given a fascinating interview when he talks about how his game has changed, how he's now more collective, how his first thought now when he gets the ball is not about his move, it's about making the team play the right move. And that's one of the reasons that makes him so great, I think. It's the coolness of his decision-making and the way that he can control a game. But will he be fit enough to do it at the end of the season, or will he be suffering from end-of-season burnout, as he clearly was in the last World Cup, and he just had to limit himself to little bursts. And I watched a few of Argentina's games from inside the stadium, and he spent quite a lot of the game just like wandering around the centre circle with his head down, as if he dropped his wedding ring or something, and then suddenly he'd do something sensational. But it was a very different Messi from the Messi that you see week in, week out. So that's the first question. How fit is he going to be at the end of the season? The second question is whether Argentina can come up with a team that's good enough to support him. And that's a big if at the moment. They still look like something of a shambles. The coach is saying that he's got 80% of his team sorted out. Well, that's in his head. It's not in anyone else's head. And the last time out, they played Russia in November and they beat them 1-0 with Messi. But you could see the defence in real problems. And lo and behold, a few days later, against Nigeria, who they'll be facing in the World Cup, no Messi this time, but other than that, more or less at full strength. They took a 2-0 lead and ended up losing 4-2. That defence absolutely collapsed. And there's a lack of defensive pace. There's a lack of defensive nous even, and you wonder if Argentina have the players to play the system that the coach wants to play. Now, there isn't a lot of time to put that right. They've got games coming up. They're in Manchester against Italy on Friday. They play Spain in Spain the following Tuesday. Before the World Cup, they're based in Barcelona, and then they go to Tel Aviv to face Israel. Now, the coach is saying that he doesn't want to play any of these games. He would rather have, instead of playing these games, he would rather spend all that time on the training ground drilling his team. The games are being played in order for the Argentine FA to make some money. So you even wonder from that quote, this is almost unheard of, I think. Going into a World Cup, a coach saying, I don't want to play these friendlies. So you wonder how Argentina will get there. If the coach can solve this collective problem, if he can come up with a coherent, cohesive side, and if Messi is fit, and that the attacking stars around him are firing on all cylinders, Argentina may be candidates to win it. If they can't get that right, then it looks like a difficult group, and you could even, and if Messi can't drag them through, against Iceland, Croatia and Nigeria, you could even imagine them getting knocked out in the first round. They're going to be one of those teams in the World Cup that you just can't take your eye off, because something big is going to happen in one penalty area or the other. Did you see the Nigeria game in November, Mark? And if you did, what did you make of the way Argentina defended?
Yeah, I did see it on television, and it was a bit of a stunner for all of us. I think for Nigeria, it's a massive. They're not over the last 7-8 months or so haven't been the greatest side either. So without the influence of Victor Moses and Obi Mikel in many of their games, haven't looked particularly impressive. So I think for Argentina to succumb or to buckle in the way that they did was certainly an eye-opener, that's for sure.
This one, again, from the United States, from Brooklyn, indeed, from Stefan. These are fighting words, by the way, from him. He says, huge fan, been listening for years, since 2003. I asked a question then, in 2003, so it's taken 15 years for this question now. So I asked a question then, so I'll ask two now. after it's taken 15 years, and I'll ask 3 questions 15 years from now, after the USA finally wins the World Cup. I said they were fighting words. So his question to both of you about the stadiums in your respective regions that were built for the World Cups in 2016, obviously in Brazil, in 2010 in South Africa.
14.
Sorry, 2014.
You've just put 6 years between World Cups.
Apologies. 14. I was thinking of the Olympic Games because you had both the World Cup and the Olympic Games. Anyway, 2000.
Very greedy.
Yeah, you were. And you're paying for it now. 2014 in Brazil and 2010 in South Africa. What happened to those stadiums, essentially? And he's got a slight added question for you, Mark, as well, which makes it 3 questions rather than 2. Anyway, he says, also, how are the...
we now move 15 years ahead.
Apparently, USA is going to be winning the World Cup that they're not in this year, clearly. Also, how are the Jomo Cosmos doing? And is it true that they're named after the New York Cosmos?
They are indeed. They're struggling in the 2nd division in South Africa. And it's a great story, actually. The link between South Africa and American football is quite strong, because in the isolation days, and particularly in the 70s, that was the destination where all the top players in this country went to, both black and white, even in the days of segregated leagues. And once the segregation in football had ended, which was 1978, which was obviously a long time before the day-to-day segregation and apartheid fell. So football was very much a leader in that aspect. But the players used to go to play in the North American Soccer League as a general destination of both of choice and maybe of, the choice was rather limited. So one of the very first stars of South African football was a player called Kaiser Motaung, who in the 1960s went to play for the Atlanta Chiefs, and he was in fact Rookie of the Year, I think 67 or 68 in the NASL. And when he came back to South Africa, his club had a bit of a feud, and some of the members split away, and they encouraged him to sort of lead the breakaway. And they used to have a team called Kaiser's 11, which went around playing exhibition matches. That later evolved into a fully fledged club on its own called Kaiser Chiefs, taking the name of Atlanta Chiefs, and in fact even the red Indian headdress or headgear as the logo. And to this day here in South Africa, the most popular club is Kaiser Chiefs, and they still wear that logo that belongs actually to the club from Atlanta. And Jomo Sono was one of South Africa's great footballers as well in the 1970s and 80s. He went to play with Pele and Beckenbauer at New York Cosmos. I think he would have been a great player in Europe had he been given the opportunity. He also played in Toronto for a long time. And when he came back to South Africa, he had enough money as a black guy to buy what was then a white club, a team called Highlands Park. He bought the franchise, he changed the name, and he called it Jomo Cosmos after New York Cosmos. Also stole the logo from the Americans, and both those clubs still exist today. And they, the American, the influence of American football, and particularly the NASL, the franchise system, is very, very much a part of South Africa today. So the connection is quite unique and quite incredible, and quite strange, given with respect the minimal role that the Americans have had maybe in the sort of spread of football around the world, but certainly the connection here is particularly strong. As to the stadiums,
I'm going to allow the play to go on for now, but just remember, I'm going to come back to give you a yellow card in a moment or two. But don't worry about it. Let the play go on. I want the play to flow, and hopefully we'll get something out of it at the end of it. But you will get a yellow card when play stops. I'm just telling you in advance, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, do go on.
But that's the end of my first story. The second one about the stadiums. In South Africa, they've made a wonderful bid over the, last almost 8 years to keep those stadiums going. They're all in fine nick. They're all used primarily by domestic football. There's also sometimes rugby games held on them. There's been 1 or 2 cricket matches played, but been a concerted effort by the municipalities who have ownership of the stadiums these days, even though the federal government paid for the paid largely for the new stadiums and for the upgrades of existing facilities. And then there are one or two owned by rugby unions, and they still thrive today. They're all well kept. There really has been a conscious effort to ensure that sort of the potential accusation of those stadiums becoming white elephants was certainly not the case here in South Africa.
Tim, I'm just going to give you a chance to carry on the play, and then I'll come back to Mark's yellow card in a moment.
All right. Well, unfortunately, from my point of view, Mark's answer is much more positive than the one I can give about 2014 stadiums. A lot of money was spent on them. Now, when the whole process started, the Brazilian population were promised that no public money would be spent on stadiums. What a cynical and gross lie that turned out to be, because huge sums of public money were spent on them, and the balance afterwards really isn't very good. Two problems. One is the structural problems of Brazilian football, which means that you now have some 21st century stadiums, but still a 19th century calendar. Makes it difficult for a lot of these stadiums to be viable, even in the heartlands. The one in Sao Paulo that Corinthians have, and they're really struggling to pay for it. The Maracanã here in Rio, the most famous of all, we still don't know what's going to happen to it. The consortium who took it over are getting out, and it's still there's still a real problems about what's going to happen to the Maracanã. There are some others which were clearly madness. And Brasilia, which was the most expensive of all. You know, there is no big team in Brasilia who can come anywhere near filling it. And I don't think there's really been a concerted effort to try and get a team in Brasilia who could fill it. Cuiabá was always a problem. Manaus was always a problem. Recife was just a disaster. And Recife is a city. It's a football city. It already has 3 clubs with their own stadiums. And the project in Recife was an out-of-town stadium. It's a long way out the city centre. And it was going to be the start of a new so-called intelligent city. So, you know, you put a stadium there and you bring lots of other things there and you're going to have life there and so on. There's nothing around there. And the clubs aren't using it very much. The transport links are very poor. It just looks like a disaster. And all of these stadiums, they cost a great deal to maintain. And maintenance is a problem in Brazil because maintenance ain't sexy. You know, what politicians love is a new project, especially when it's new. It can be inaugurated, you know, when you can cut a ribbon and the politician can be there in the photo. That's what they love. Just maintaining something that some other politician built, you don't want to do that. So there are real problems with it. It was a really badly thought out project. There was nowhere near enough debate with civil society going into it. You know, how much money are we going to spend and what are we going to get back for it? Those items really weren't discussed. It was all along, you know, the flag waving patriotism. You know, we have the World Cup. Let's jump up and down and celebrate and have a party. And unfortunately, it was a good party, but in financial terms, it just doesn't make any sense.
So let me just pull you back and give you this yellow card, Mark. That's your first official warning. Springboka Junior. How do you spell that? Springbo.
Can you just write his number down? I think that's what they do these days. Isn't it? You don't have to write the name.
But he's so tall, I can't see that high. I'll just write Springboka Junior. Right.
It's 54-46.
That's his number, yeah, apparently so.
That's his number.
Yeah, that's his number. So he's got a yellow card. Okay.
What's it for, Mr. F?
Oh, you want to know what it's for? Okay, you're going to have to listen back on the action replay. But basically, it's the equivalent of spitting in somebody's face. But I know you didn't mean to. It's kind of like you need to get your teeth fixed so that you don't spit inadvertently in somebody's face. But when you did describe, you know, Native Americans as Red Indians, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you a yellow card. I have to go home. You know, I've got a wife and kids and all that sort of stuff. I had to do it, mate. I'm sorry, mate. Yeah? Does that make sense?
So outdated terminology is what I'm being booked for.
Yeah, you could look at it. Okay. I like to think of it as spitting in somebody's face. Anyway, that's part of the narrative of football in the last week here in the UK, at least. Ben in Auckland, New Zealand, is with us. Good morning, Ben.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's lovely to be on the show with you today.
Great to have you with us, yeah. The All Whites and everything, how are they doing?
Don't ask.
Don't ask, don't. Isn't that what President Clinton said about gay men in the army? Don't say, don't ask, and just carry on your lives. Something like that. Anyway, don't ask, don't
last
tell.
time I called you guys was to talk up our chances against Peru, of course, in the playoff, and we saw how that went. That's why I haven't called you for a few months.
Yeah, it hurts, doesn't it?
If only, Ben, if only Chris Wood had been fit. Because, when he came on in both games, the Peru defence really couldn't handle him. Do you think, had he been 100%, do you think that New Zealand could have got over the line?
That's definitely what we've been telling ourselves for the past few months. And then when you see him come back for injury like he has, what has he played, like 75 minutes since he came back from injury, and he's already scored 3 goals and an assist. So he's doing well in the Premier League, so we'd like to think he could have done well against Peru.
He's doing very well in the Premier League, indeed. So, you got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I spent a short time, far too short a time, living in the state of Pará in the Brazilian Amazon, not far from the city of Belém. And almost everyone I met there supported either Paysandu or Remo, the local clubs, neither of which is in the big leagues of Brazilian football. And it was easy to get the distinct impression that any kid growing up in that part of the country, a long, long way from the glamour clubs in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, might be at a disadvantage in terms of resources and coaching compared to their cousins growing up in the larger southern cities. But I do know that when it comes to another sport in which Brazilians excel, mixed martial arts, there are fighters who grew up in the cities of Manaus and Belém who reached the very top of that sport and became world champions. So my question for Tim is whether there have been many top-level footballers from up there in the Amazon, and if so, who are some of the names we might recognise from the past and the present in that region?
I like the question. Tim?
Yeah, the one who stands out for me is Giovanni, who was at Barcelona, went to the 1998 World Cup with Brazil, played the first game against Scotland, and only he was seen again. And he was a lovely playmaker to watch, but he was one of those very languid playmakers. I think he drove his coaches mad, both with the Brazilian national team and with Barcelona. I think he drove Bobby Robson mad. Bobby Robson was his coach at Barcelona. You could see him lots of time just yelling at Giovanni, almost like trying to get him to wake up, finish your nap. There's almost as if they wanted to stick some dynamite down his backside to get him up and running. But he was very, very talented. It is interesting, isn't it, how that difference between the individual sports and the area has produced other athletes in individual sports, and the difficulty that this is the extreme north, really. But even on the whole of the northeast, the clubs are really at a disadvantage when you compare them with Rio and São Paulo and Belo Horizonte and Porto Alegre, which are the 4 major cities. Now, one problem I think that Brazilian football has is the distribution of TV money. It's a very concentrationist model where it's very hard for these teams outside of those big 4 to really make a breakthrough. But the potential for these clubs is massive. And I remember Paysandu winning away against Boca Juniors in the Copa Libertadores. This is going back around 15 years. It was a memorable performance. They got tonked at home in the next round by Boca and went out. But for them to go to Boca Juniors, the legendary stadium there at the Bombonera, and win that game was absolutely terrific. But you often find that these clubs, Paysandu and Remo, if they get up to the first division, then it's straight back down again, or at most maybe 2 or 3 seasons. And one problem I think they have is travelling for every away game, because the Brazilian First Division has 20 clubs, and the vast majority, over 15, are in the south and southeast. So that's an epic journey that these sides have to take for every game, and maybe that's something that puts Paysandu and Remo at a disadvantage when it comes to national football.
Yeah, and Ben, thanks a lot for the call as well.
Across the UK. This is BBC 5 Live. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
Yeah, and with our world football phone-in pundits, Mark Gleeson in Africa and Tim, whatever his name is, Vickery in South America.
Quite right, because Gleeson is supplying the ideas and I'm supplying the idiocy to follow Mourinho's.
Jose Mourinho, yeah, indeed. That was quite some rants, wasn't it? Anyway, one of these nights we'll do, famous rants by football coaches, I promise you, but not tonight. And by the way, Mark,
I would love it it if you do that. I would love it. I would just love it. I would love it if that was to happen.
I wish you wouldn't do the accents, Tim, because you've been away so long. Nobody speaks like that in that part of the world anymore. Anyway, Mark, Anand in Delhi thinks he knows why you're in Durban and not in Cape Town tonight.
Go ahead.
Because they've got water in Durban, boom, boom.
He's so right.
Mick in South East London is with us. Good morning, Mick.
Oh, good morning, Don. Thanks for taking my call.
It's a pleasure.
How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. And you good, yeah?
Good morning to Mark Springboka Junior.
Good morning, sir.
And good morning to Tim, whatever his name is, Legendinho Tim Vickery.
That'll do. I'll answer to that. I'm happy with anything. I'm not proud.
You got it right.
Leave him, Mark.
We'll have to speak privately.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a question, Don. It's a question that crossed my mind after listening to the sport news. That the fact that FIFA has given the go-ahead to this video-assisted referee.
Yeah, for the World Cup.
For everything, I suppose. If you're going to have a World Cup, it's across football, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
And I wondered, like I say, I'd very much like your opinion on it.
I have no opinion. I'm a BBC journalist.
You
Go
would.
on. Yeah, go on.
But what do the guys think?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to declare my interest.
Please do.
No.
Okay.
I would like to think what the two guys think.
Okay, and then we'll come back to you.
Being included in football.
And we'll come back to you for your interest as well, declaring your interest in a moment. But Mark first.
Okay, thank you.
VAR, are you a fan of it for the World Cup?
Well, I'm not a fan of it, but I think it is inevitable that we head in that direction, and I think it will implement it properly and shown more clearly to the supporters, both particularly in the stadium but also on television. I think it will become an integral part of the game in the future, just as it has in sports like tennis and rugby, etc., where it does play a positive part, I feel.
How do you think it will change the game? How do you think it will change the way that the game is played?
Yeah, there will be changes to the way the game is played. I don't think necessarily in a negative way. I do think a lot of the contentious issues that make football so wonderful, however, will go out the window. It'll be a little bit more, just a little cleaner and almost a little bland in a way. I think we're going to miss the controversy that follows from some of the significant human error that we've had in football. But don't you feel the world is going that way anyway? It's everything these days is just so technologically polished that to my mind it's inevitable, and it has to be done, because there's a generation coming through now who are going to watch the game and going to watch it in a very different way to the way that we watched it, and are from that technological era. So I think it's had to go that way, but I'm not a particularly big fan of it. I wait with great interest to see what happens in Russia. I think this VAR thing those are going to be the three most used letters throughout the 2018 World Cup, that's for sure. It used to be GOAL, now it's VAR.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. But do you think it will particularly affect the way that African teams, or African players, I should say, conduct themselves going a bit too far? But there will be issues in the way that they play football, I imagine, that will be caught up on VAR, whether to their detriment or otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, because we're not exposed here to VAR on this continent, I think it will just happen. It will be sort of in and around the games involved in the Africans, whereas, but you must remember, a lot of them also from clubs in Europe will have had some exposure to it. So I don't think it's going to influence an approach by any African team or the way they play. And but I think that's a good question that maybe is probably better answered in about a year's time or 2 years' time, when we how and turn it around and say, how did VAR change the way that Africans played, because I'm not so sure we can figure that out right now.
How about South America, Tim?
Well, most people, certainly the media here, are really in favour of it. I suspect that they're really in favour of it because they haven't had it yet. Because what strikes me is wherever it's being used, there is a lot of rejection. I saw a statistic. I think Germany, nearly half the players in Germany don't want it to be used anymore. Firstly, in the short term, with the World Cup, I'm worried. And my worry here is that I don't think anyone's ready for it. I don't think fans are ready for it. I'm not sure players are ready for it. I'm not sure that the officials are ready for it either. So I wonder if we're going too fast bringing it into the World Cup, and I fear for controversy. In the longer term, and it clearly is going to come in. I agree with Mark on the technology, in spite of all our misgivings. But one thing that it's not going to do, it's not going to remove controversy.
Yeah.
And the people who are in favour of it, when they give their argument, they always give a totally black and white moment, an absolutely clear moment, and they say, well, look, VAR could have sorted that one out. Okay, fair enough. But the vast majority of decisions in football are not so clear-cut, and they can be interpreted in different ways. They are marginal decisions, and a marginal decision, by its very definition, can be right or can be wrong. So you get very, very tight offside decisions. Now, that depends on the exact moment that the fella operating the screen stops the image. That can have all the effect. It may be offside, it may not be offside. It's not cut and dry. There's still room. Was it a foul? Was it a foul? Was it a foul?
Yeah.
Did it happen inside the area or outside? Sometimes these are issues of interpretation. And because the whole football industry, everyone wants controversy, especially in the media. The media want controversy. So it's not going to end the controversy. It's going to change the forum for the controversy. And instead of swearing at the man in black, we're going to be swearing at the man watching the thing in a video box. And in terms of the way that the game is played, the thing that concerns me is it's a magical moment in football when a goal is scored and the referee points to the centre circle. You see the referee pointing to the centre circle straight away, and it's a goal.
Yeah,
and that noise in the stadium, whether it's your fans or the other side's fans, that noise in the stadium is absolutely magic. Now I've seen the statistic being peddled out where VAR comes in, more time is wasted waiting for throw-ons to happen than is wasted for waiting for the VAR decision. For me, that has no relevance whatsoever, because waiting for a throw-on to be taken, that's just part of a normal lull in the game. No, but remember Einstein, relativity. We experience time differently in accordance to what's happening. A goal. Now that's magic. That's the moment of football. It doesn't happen very often. And you really want that to be celebrated. And if there's this horrible delay before you know whether you can celebrate or not, then that takes something away from the purity of the celebration. So my worry long term is whether we're going to lose more than we gain from the introduction of VAR.
Well,
I'm worried about it coming in too soon for the World Cup.
And never mind Einstein. What about, remember Professor Stephen Hawking, A Brief Moment in Time? And the brief moment in time is when a player scores, looks across at the linesman to make sure it's not offside, and then starts celebrating. There's a moment of time, just a slight fraction of a moment of time, when he's unsure, looks across and he's given the nod, then starts celebrating. Here, he'll score, he'll just be about to rejoice and then think, hang on a second, this might be snatched away from me any moment. Indeed. Having said that,
it takes something away.
But when you say that a throw-in's a natural pause in the game, that's what a VAR will be in the future, though. It will be the natural pause. It will be the same thing. It will be a natural pause. I don't think
there's any natural pause after a goal.
No, you don't.
It's that celebration or it's not.
But now you don't. But 10 years from now you will. Do you remember the time when they started allowing goalkeepers to run with the ball in the penalty area, in the goal box? They started allowing, instead of bouncing the ball after every couple of steps. It looked unnatural, didn't it? When you suddenly saw a goalkeeper running with the ball under his arm. And it looked unnatural, but now it's the most natural thing.
Yeah, but you're messing with goals. I mean, that's what football's all about. Anyway, what's Mick's view in South East London?
Mick, declare your interest now, mate. You've heard the wisdom.
The reason I brought the question up, Don, and I'm very interested in what your opinion is on it.
I have no opinion. I'm a BBC presenter.
Controversy.
That's the American firm.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, we say controversy.
Right
controversy. I don't know what we say. Go on. Sorry.
Over the Tottenham and was it Rochdale match in the Cup, the FA Cup?
Why are you asking me about Tottenham? I'm from Charlton. You know that.
So am I.
Yeah, there you go. Ask Tim about Tottenham.
But this was the first time I realised it was being used. I was working at the time.
Yeah.
But obviously we had it on the screens at work. And there was all shouts and hollers and, oh, that shouldn't have been done, that shouldn't have been done. So that's the reason I brought it up.
How many Rotherham fans do you work with then?
Rochdale.
Sorry, Rochdale fans you work with.
Mainly Millwall, unfortunately, for me.
There you go.
So they're all Rochdale fans that afternoon, I'm sure.
But if I can just say that I agree with Tim. I'm very worried, and I also agree with Mark because I believe it will turn it bland.
Thank you for your thoughts, Mick. Thanks very much. We've got Cleo in Aldershot with us as well. Good morning, Cleo.
Good morning, Dutton. Good morning, Tim. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, Cleo.
Morning. Mark, Morocco are bid for the 2026 World Cup. I know the USA, Canada and Mexico have as well. And I know FIFA's keen for the 2030 to be in Uruguay, who won the first World Cup, 1930. Do you think the kingdom's robust enough to hold that? Because they talk about expanding to 48 teams. What's your opinion on that one?
Yeah, I think it'll be a real stretch for them. Look, they've tried now ad nauseum to win the right to win the World Cup, and it seems to me
6 attempts, haven't they?
Yeah, and they always seem to go up. Besides the time when it was exclusively available for the African countries only, they always seem to go up against really tough opponents. I mean, the American bid doesn't sound all that. At the moment, seems to be struggling. We just saw Chicago pull out as a potential host city because of the odious requirements from FIFA, allegedly. I think that there are a lot of problems in America with the kind of rules and tax breaks and things like that FIFA want to bring in when they are hosts of the World Cup, or that FIFA demand from the host country, which sometimes I think are particularly difficult to fulfill. So I think there's going to be a lot of problem there, and that might be a window of opportunity, a little glimmer of hope for Morocco's bid. But really, up against the Americans and the Canadians and the Mexicans, it's still a massive commercial frontier for football to conquer, and a market that is just absolutely gaining year after year is a massive ask for Morocco. I think what's also against them is that Qatar becomes the first Arab country to host a World Cup next time round after Brazil, so they've lost that trump card. I think giving the Arab world an opportunity to host a major international event like the World Cup's always been on the agenda. It certainly was for Joseph Blatter. But you never know. I think if the American and Canadian and Mexican bid seems to be in a bit of trouble, then Morocco could well win it. It's going to be very tough for them, as you suggest, to host it, because it's a country of limited facilities, but it's also a growing country in terms of international tourism. So I think it's interesting. It's a little bit strange, in my opinion, why they keep coming back to this. I think perhaps sometimes national pride and ego might trump common sense. But this is a World Cup bid that is not far away from being decided, and is becoming more and more interesting by the day.
Well, you can see why they keep making a bid for it, because it would transform the country. It's a football mad country.
No, for sure, and I think it will help there. What is now a massive industry for them, tourism. I mean, Morocco is one of the most stunning places to go and visit. I mean, the culture and the food and the sights and sounds are absolutely extraordinary. But I think, Cleo's suggestion is it's not a big place. It doesn't have that many facilities, and 48 countries being hosted in Morocco is going to be tough. I suggest on that score, Cleo, there might, there's also the opportunity to maybe shift some base camps to Algeria, or maybe have, some teams might be based in the south of Spain.
Maybe that's what they should have done. That's
something that they can overcome.
Joint hosting it with Tunisia or somewhere like that, it would have made more sense. But they are.
Well, I think you don't have to joint host. You could also dip into facilities. I mean, the crossing from Spain to Morocco is fairly quick, and these days what you really do need is 48 base camps for the teams to be based at, and if you don't have enough in Morocco, you could certainly use stuff in the south of Spain.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. It's lower Spain to some people, indeed, so close.
How hot would it be at that time of year?
Yeah, pretty hot.
It's funny. It's funny how the Europeans are always concerned about how hot it's going to be when it comes to hosting a World Cup in Africa, though, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, but not all that different to the
Africa.
heat. Well, no, so it was South Africa, Southern Hemisphere. But I mean, the heat in the States in '94 was incredible in some of those matches. I mean, you might remember Jack Charlton going on at the referee, trying to get some water onto his players, and the heat in Recife and Manaus and places like that was pretty extraordinary as well. So I don't know, Morocco's not all.
Hello, Mark, you still there? We lost
Sahara Desert, but it's not a Qatar.
Yeah. But it is a lot of Sahara Desert, I could tell you that. There's a lot in Morocco, nevertheless. Okay, this is from one listener. Oh, no, we've got a few from the States, actually. Let me bring on this other question. I like this one from James in Davis, California. By the way, Cleo, thanks a lot for the call. James in Davis, California says, it has been approximately 157 days since what, Tim?
Since the World Cup draw, since our 20-year celebrations.
157 days since what, Mark?
Since the Cornish Pasty Fest.
You're not taking this seriously, are you? I will tell you that many Americans will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's been approximately 157 days. What is approximately? Come on, be more exact. Anyway, it's approximately 157 days since the USA failed to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. In the aftermath of this event, my interest in something that was a once huge part of my life has fallen apart. I've stopped watching games on TV, stopped following news online, stopped playing the FIFA video game, and even though I'm ashamed to say it, stopped listening to World Football Phoning. Oh, cheers, mate. My question for tonight's guests and listeners is this. How have you gotten over a particularly rough loss or result as a fan? Any advice for me to get back on the wagon? Help me love soccer once again. Tim, do you want to start?
Well, my first World Cups, I'm just too young for Mexico 70. I just turned 5. I'm not sure we had a TV. I think my dad might have got in a TV just to watch that World Cup, a little black and white thing. But I can just about remember collecting some stickers, or a few stickers, but I can't really remember it. But by 1974, I was ready. I was available for selection. I wanted to go to that World Cup. I was ready for the 74 World Cup. I wanted to kick every ball. And lo and behold, what goes and happens? England don't qualify. The first time that England don't qualify, and it's my first World Cup, and that was a cruel blow. But your interest in the game shouldn't be just about your own team. There are so many epic stories going on in the World Cup, and there'll be people in Davis, California, where our friend comes from. That there will be people with a background from lots of countries that are competing in the World Cup. So it won't be hard for you to involve yourself in some other narrative, and maybe the fact that your own team isn't involved, maybe that takes some of the nerves out of it, because And I ended up absolutely loving the 74 World Cup, and lo and behold, the same thing happened in 78. England didn't qualify for that one either. It takes some of that gut-breaking tension away from it. You don't have to wake up in the morning sweating, thinking, "Oh God, we've got to beat so and so today, or it's all over." You can sit back a little bit and enjoy it, while at the same time getting involved in some of the narratives of your neighbours and colleagues.
But how do you do it though, Mark? How do you bite your thumb?
I've got a suggestion if you're American, because I'm also a child of the New World. Look into that New World heritage of yours. There must be a little bit of French in there somewhere, maybe a little bit of German, some Swede.
Yeah, of course. Divided loyalties, yeah.
And as an American, you've got a good pick. I would presume if you've been 4 or 5, 6, 7 generations back in the States, you could pick a team to support and take them on.
Okay, and this is a question from Ibrahim, who says, with regards to the World Cup, for both of you, what effect will the distances travelled during the World Cup have on the outcome? We saw with England last World Cup the effect of long flights and base camp locations, etc. What do you think the difference, or what effect will it have, Mark? First? Hello, Mark. Oh, we can barely hear you. Hello?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You're back. You're back,
I can hear you nice and clearly.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
You haven't gone away, not at all.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere either.
At all.
Even though you'd like me to, I'm not going anywhere.
I didn't say anything of the sort.
I know you didn't.
Yeah, so as for Vickery, it might be a different story. Look, these days, those teams are all shifted around from their base camp to their match venues, as they have been certainly since 2010, but maybe even in Germany. Germany more by train, but in 2010 they moved around exclusively in private jets. It's very comfortable. It's very easy. The effects of it is a long. In some cases there will be some long distance flights. Not much different, I think, from going from Manaus to Porto Alegre potentially, if there was a team that did that. But it's all very comfortable for the teams. And remember, they pick their bases. Most of the sides put a reservation down on the bases that they wanted to use before the draw was made, but it was all secured after the draw. So you had an opportunity to change if you felt you were going to travel too far after you found out in which cities you were going to play. But I would suggest that's really not a factor in the World Cup. Those teams move around in absolute style and comfort. There's no queuing for commercial jets like the rest of us, or trains, etc. They go into the city in which they are playing the night before. That's the rule. So they spend one night in a hotel. They get a run out at the stadium, a little chance to test out the pitch, etc., and then they play, and then they're back to the base camp. It's all very comfortable for the teams, and I think that whole thing of travel is negligible, even in a country with the distances that Russia has.
And Tim, do you agree?
Not entirely. I think it'll be less of a problem in Russia than it was in Brazil. A lot of the venues in Russia are kind of compact. There's a lot around the centre of the country, or the southeast of the centre, including not far from the centre, Nizhny Novgorod. I'm really looking forward to the opportunities that this World Cup is going to give us to say Nizhny Novgorod. Okay. There's Yekaterinburg right out in the east. That's the far out and far east there. But the difference, I think, between this and Brazil is that it's more or less entirely the same season. It's all summer. Some places were a little bit cooler than others. But Brazil, you had vast differences because the southern hemisphere, you had places, tropical places, and you had places that were winter. Every team that went up to Manaus in the north lost its next game. It clearly had an effect. I think the effect will be less in Russia because there are fewer climate differences.
Great question from Chris in Sheffield. I'll give you a moment to ponder it. He says, in the view of the panel, what could be the next great tactical innovation and where could it come from? And P.S., please do not mention philosophy. So we haven't had the...
Good point. Good point. I'm with him all the way.
Yeah, we haven't had the high press philosophy.
So Socrates.
Oh, yeah. God. I was about to read the rest of the email. Thanks for corpsing me on that one, Tim.
5 Live is digital. Get the app, search for 5 Live podcasts, and listen on digital radio.
Well, football phoning this morning is Africa and South America and players from over there playing in our leagues. So we've got the Springboka Junior Mark with us from Durban this morning rather than from Cape Town. And we've got the Legendinho Tim with us in Rio de Janeiro rather than Tottenham, North London. And they'll take your questions on African and South American football, respectively. We'll come back to Jamie in Coventry in a moment. Jamie, hopefully, do you mind waiting for just a couple of seconds, Jamie?
That's fine by me.
And by the way, I should warn you now, as you're from Coventry, expect Tim Vickery to do his black country accent. You know that.
No, they don't do that in Coventry.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, does it, to the rest of us? Yeah, okay, well.
Bland in Coventry.
Yeah, the big COV as it's known. And we're not going to send you there.
Nothing bland about Two-Tone City.
Oh, there you go. Just bear with us, Jamie. We'll be with you in just a second. There are loads more jokes about Coventry to come, by the way. Lady Godiva and all of that. So, over the last century, Chris in Sheffield says, over the last century, we've seen a number of tactical innovations, don't call them philosophies, including Herbert Chapman's counter-attack, the high press, sweepers, total football, tiki-taka. In the view of the panel, what could be the next great tactical innovation and where could it come from? Anywhere in Africa, Mark?
No, I think in Africa there is a great study these days because of television, of course, allowing Africans access to the world game. There's a great study of the way things are played in Spain, the way things are played in Italy and in England, and there's a lot of copying at the moment. It's very fashionable for young coaches to follow the trends set by the likes of Guardiola and Mourinho, etc., and to talk it up as well in the domestic medias here in Africa. So I'm afraid the thinking around football these days is to sort of try and be as quick to follow the innovative trends from elsewhere, as opposed to sort of coming up with authentic African stuff, which hopefully might happen in the future. I do think with the unique skills of the African football and maybe this being the last continent where good old street football skills are still very much part of the young players' upbringing, that might transform itself into some form of tactic that we might see in the future.
And what kind of tactic would that be? Where could...
Look, I think if you've got a definitive answer to arguably the best question we've had in many, many episodes, you'd make yourself an absolute fortune, consulting to the top coaches of world football. I think that's a very, very difficult one to answer. I'll tell you what I do think is going to happen in football is that the element of chance that is still very much part of the game. And when I talk about the element of chance, take a crossing, for example. That's a 50-50 exercise. Ball out to the wing, banged in. It is still a sort of a hit and hope exercise. I think a lot of that is going to disappear out of the game. Players are not going to be allowed by coaches to swing it in on a wing and a prayer and hope that someone gets on the end of it. I think it's all going to be a lot more measured. It's going to be, passes or crosses made are going to be much more, the end result of them are going to be much more assured, or the destination or the end receiver are going to be a lot more assured. And I think that's going to make a fundamental difference to the way the game is played over the next 10 years or so. You see that more and more these days, and I think it's very much a philosophy that's coming to the fore.
Ooh.
When you have possession.
Is that another yellow card for using the word philosophy?
I was coming on to that. Just you mind your own business. I don't like all these players waving, ref. Give me yellow, give me yellow. So I'm ignoring that just because of that. I was going to. He would have had a red card with that, but no.
That's the problem.
And this European stuff creeping into our game.
If you appeal to the referee in that cynical South American way, looking to I would presume any decent ref would turn around.
I'm a decent ref.
Exactly, and put the yellow in another direction.
Well, I was going to, but I'm holding it back. I've given him a word of warning in his ear. That'd be sufficient for now. But if he tries that again, he will get a yellow. Indeed. Okay, without mentioning the word philosophy, Tim, what about innovations coming from South America, any?
Well, I've heard a lot of kind of the old guard of coaches on this issue, and they seem to be in agreement, and including I think Ancelotti from Europe, that the progress that will happen from now on is not collective. It is in the refinement of the individual player. It is getting the individual player to be more polyfunctional, to be able to carry out more roles inside the team, and refinement along the lines that Mark suggested there with statistics dictating choices. So the kind of hit it and hope cross gets stamped out because there's a statistical background to show that route is not a particularly reliable one. As far as I'm concerned, I think the march of football tactics, for me, it still comes to a kind of peak with Dutch football in the early 70s and Holland in 1974. Because what you've got there with that kind of total football is the idea that a team is made up of 11 players. Or players, as I think they said in Holland at the time, and you want to get as many of your players involved in the action at any one time. So you stop the video. How many of your whatever are actually playing? I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to do it again. Yeah. So even the goalkeeper becomes a player. You saw that with Holland in the early 70s. The goalkeeper would be a sweeper keeper. He'd come out and he'd take responsibility for things 30 or 40 yards from goal, or even further, allowing the team to press up. So the goalkeeper becomes a player, and you see that in Guardiola. He wants a team of 11 midfielders. So once you've reached that point, once you've done away with specialisation, and you have 11 players all involved in both the attacking phase and the defensive phase, all of them involved, I think that's the kind of limit. And what happens after that is refinements, such as the goalkeeper, instead of just coming out and hoofing the ball into the stands, the goalkeeper getting better with his feet, so he starts being able to initiate moves from the back as well. Now, that doesn't mean that new things won't happen, because what things that we might see as new are actually old things being rediscovered. And I think Leicester City and their title win is an example of that. And they played good old-fashioned 4-4-2. It was like a rediscovery of 4-4-2. Or when Greece won the European Championship in 2004, they rediscovered man-to-man marking. They played something that had gone out of fashion. So it's almost like you've got a collage there of possible options to use. But as far as I'm concerned, once you get to the point where everyone is a player, I can't see where collectively you can go then, apart from refining. And from where any new refinements are going to come from, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say Europe, because it congregates the best coaches now and the best players, and you've got that advantage that Europe has always had in so many senses. You've got that cluster of countries and cities together, so you've got a network of people talking to each other, and one taking the idea from another and refining that idea. And you see that the effect of that clearly with Germany, the transformation of Germany. Germany realise they're not very good, even though they're still getting to finals and so on. They realise they're not very good. So what do? We study what Spain are doing. Spain it's only like an hour and a half flight. So we go there, we study what Spain are doing, and we bring that into our model. And that's the thing that Europe has. It's all those countries close together, so you've got a network of people talking about it and refining things.
And of course, you don't have to fly over there if Pep Guardiola is prepared to come and fly to you, if you see what I mean.
Indeed.
Mohammed in the mountain. So, Jamie in Coventry, good morning.
Good morning, Doctor.
Yeah, good to speak to you now. So you've got a question for both.
Yes, there's mainly one question for Tim, and then there's a question they could probably both answer.
Okay.
Question for Tim is based on I can't actually remember his first name. It's Paredes. I think he's playing for Zenit in Petersburg. In the summer, I knew he was a decent young player, and I thought he was going to move to a bigger club than Zenit. I'm just wondering why he may have moved, and if he could have got a bigger move, maybe to a better European club.
Well, that's where so much of the money is now, isn't it? And so you get this thing of South American players going to Ukraine, although that may be coming to an end now, or going to Russia as well, because that's where the money is, and sometimes that's where the first big move comes in, and they can't turn it down, and their club doesn't want them to turn it down. It was a surprise to me that he went there, looking good at Roma and beginning to find his place at Roma. But they've taken over a little cluster of Argentines, as well as Paredes. They've got Kranjvica, who's a holding midfielder to play alongside him. Rigoni and Driussi, Rigoni's a winger, Driussi is a kind of support striker, a little bit reminiscent of Peter Beardsley. So, whereas like some of the Shakhtars in Ukraine have gone with a cluster of Brazilians, they've gone with a cluster of Argentines. And that's where the money is. Be interesting to see if Paredes goes to the World Cup with Argentina, because that will certainly boost him. Some of these players have really benefited from going to Eastern Europe. And think of Fernandinho, for example. He came on there, and there's another one, his old club, Fregi, who is likely to move to Man City in the summer. Some of them have really benefited from it. Others have just got lost there and ended up wishing that they hadn't done it. Once Paredes is already in Rome, then I think it's a surprise that he goes. But Kranjvica went from Sevilla, so I think it's an example of the financial power of that club. Paredes is in the squad for Argentina for these games they've got. They're playing Italy at Man City's ground on Friday, and then Spain the following Tuesday. So if he can show then, because there are still plenty of places up for grabs, a good World Cup will really put him in the shop window and maybe a move somewhere else.
What's the other question, Jamie?
The question is probably for both of them. Is players from any of their countries where they think they've stayed at their club maybe too long, and then when they have made the big move, it hasn't really worked out for them, and what are the most common or popular ones to say?
So, what about that, Mark? Players who've stayed with one club a bit too long for that big move?
In Africa, I think the best example were those two Hassan twins from Egypt who were massively successful with Al Ahly, and won a lot of titles with the club, not only within Egypt but also across the continent. Played at the 1990 World Cup, and on the back of that, Hassan, the striker, the other brother Ibrahim was a fullback, went off to Switzerland. He went to Glasgow Celtic. He really was a massive phenomenon on the African continent, but just a little bit too late in his career to make any impact on the European circuit, and really was a massive disappointment, I think, to those clubs that purchased him, but also to fans in Africa who sort of felt they knew this player, they knew how good he was, and they were so excited to see how well he was going to do on the European stage, and he never really did anything at all. I think he was at Neuchâtel in Switzerland and Celtic, and I think there was one or two other clubs, but completely anonymous on the European circuit, and I think probably hardly even remembered by the fans of those European clubs he played for. But in Africa, one of the top 10 all-time footballers, Hossam Hassan.
What about in South America, Tim?
There's one at the moment. He was voted the best player in South American football last year, Luan of Grêmio, who's a very talented support striker, very intelligent at getting in between the lines and splitting the opposing defence with his passes. Absolutely vital for Brazil when they won the Olympics 2 years ago. And he came in, and suddenly the side that wasn't functioning at all, suddenly they start functioning. And he took Grêmio to the Copa Libertadores last year, South America's Champions League equivalent, but he's still at Grêmio, and he's 25 later this month. And you wonder if he's going to go now. And Luan, he was receiving offers from Ukraine and Russia, as we were just talking about. Turned them down. Didn't want that. Wants a big Western European club. But it could be that he may have left it too late now at 25. You know, he's been linked with Liverpool in the past. And the worry is because the European clubs now, they want them earlier and earlier and earlier. They're almost ripping them out of the womb, you know, to get them over to Europe, because they think, and I think they're probably right in this, that the gap between top-level club football in South America and top-level club football in Europe has never been wider. So if you want to get a player good in Europe, you want to get him over early and teach him how to operate in European conditions. So that means that if a player explodes a little bit late or gets into his mid-20s, there's an element of mistrust now from the European clubs. You know, maybe it's too late. Maybe we can't get him to play the way that's going to be effective over in Europe. So I think it's a real question mark with Luan. It doesn't look like he's going to go to the World Cup. And at 25, you wonder if he will get an opportunity to move to a big Western European club.
You see, I've been told that having an opinion or having no opinion is an opinion. That's exactly what Jean-Paul Sartre would say. So that's an existentialist.
Silence is a rhythm too, as the Slits.
And it's golden. And it's golden as well. As you know, as everybody knows, yeah. Mm-hmm. This is from Steve, who says, over the past couple of weeks, the behaviour of footballers who ply their trade could be said to have set an example for the rest of the world, from Gigi Buffon paying for a private plane from London to Florence so that his teammates could attend the funeral of David Astori, to Dries Mertens being discovered on the streets of Naples delivering pizzas to the city's homeless. The image has been heartwarmingly positive. Can this type of conduct be found amongst players around the globe, or is there something particular to, let's say, Italian society, particularly the tight connection between the clubs and their fans, that makes this a typically Italian phenomenon, or not, Mark?
Well, these days, the marketing departments at the big clubs, and even here on the African continent, ensure that, you know, the players get out and they are seen in and amongst the community. They do hospital visits, they do all sorts of eye-catching and publicity-catching things, and you wonder how much of it is, you know, genuine and how much has been driven by someone in the marketing department. You know, as a confirmed cynic, I look at these things with a little bit of a jaundiced eye, and when you do see the occasional sort of spontaneous thing by footballers, you applaud it, but you wonder how much of it is driven by, you know, brand marketing, individual marketing, etc. these days. So certainly the African continent is not all that much different to the, you know, the big clubs here are not all that much different to the clubs in Europe. They've all got decent marketing departments. They all speak to big commercial interests, and as a result, you do see the players doing a lot of. It's these days, it's part of the detail of a footballer. You know that you're training at such and such an hour, and then after that you're going off on, you know, to see this sponsor or to go to that hospital, etc. So how much of it is genuinely driven, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the same in South America as well, Tim.
Yeah, I don't think, certainly here in Brazil, I don't think they do that much. I don't think they do anything like as much as Premier League clubs have done since before it was the Premier League. I mean, you know, even when it was the old First Division and Second Division and so on, clubs used to do quite a lot of like hospital visits. One argument that you could muster in their favour is that they do have an awful lot of games here. So maybe there's less free time and there's more travelling because you're travelling around a vast country. But I think there is a lot more that could be done. I think marketing departments are really in their infancy over here in kind of promoting those kind of actions. And for me, you know, if you examine your motives for every good thing you do, that's a fairly quick route to madness. So enough for me that a good thing is done, rather than worrying too much about its motive.
Lassan in Beverly Hills, this is the real Beverly Hills in Los Angeles, says, my question for everyone, including the great referee Dotson, I'll stay out of this if you don't mind. In 1994, I was at the World Cup press conference at the LA Conventional Center when I met the great Roger Milla And before I could introduce myself, he asked me, where is the bathroom? I was honoured to walk the great man to the bathroom. And my question is, what's the most memorable question that's been asked of either of you by some footballer, great or otherwise? Mark?
Well, Roger was when I was thrashing him on the tennis court. So how's that for going 1-up on you?
Wait, hang on, say that again. Roger Miller did what?
He asked what the score was when I was thrashing him on the tennis court.
You were thrashing him. I thought you said something else.
No, I didn't, Dotton.
Yeah,
take a yellow then.
Yeah, I would take a yellow if I'd said what I thought you'd said. That's why I asked you, you what? You what? Thrashing sounds like another thing here in the UK, yeah. Especially, if you're a Cockney, we don't say our THs, sometimes they sound like Fs. Anyway, that's another story. Yeah, so he asked you what the score was. And what was the score? What was the score, out of interest?
I think it was 6-2. If I remember, 6-2, 6-3. It was a very, very good South African win over the Cameroonians on the court in Dakar in the '92 African Nations Cup Finals. He was playing in that tournament.
Yeah.
And it was the days when the journalists and the players were all in the same hotel. You went off down to breakfast. I suppose the second most famous thing I heard was, what's the porridge like this morning, or something like that.
What's the porridge like this morning? Yeah. And what was the score when you took on Roger Miller in five-a-side football? What was the score then? That's what we're interested in.
Haven't had that opportunity.
Ah, okay.
But I did save a penalty from my Bertie Pele once. So that's
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm impressed with that.
It's wonderful
God,
stuff.
what did he say when you saved that?
He was quite. I thought to myself, I was a little bit taken aback that he was full of praise, and he sort of suggested that I might have a future in the game in the goal, and I sort of thought to myself, I'm not so sure you know much about football if you've watched me for the rest of the 89 minutes, but. He was a very nice man, I bet. One of the real gentlemen of African football, and
yeah. And of course, his sons are in our league now.
Yeah, we had a game. This was all during the build-up to the World Cup, the first South African World Cup bid, and players like George Weah, Abedi Pele, Roger Miller were all conscripted as ambassadors for the South African bid. So they were in South Africa regularly, and there were often football games involved. I mean, I've been in the same team with George Weah, Pele, and Miller. And have the team photo to prove it, which is an extraordinary experience, to be with three absolute greats. And we probably played at least 3 or 4 football games during that bid period. Invited journalists, some football administrators, etc., on various different occasions at various different events, including one on Robben Island where. They set up. They took the FIFA people to go and have a look at where Mandela was incarcerated, and there was a football pitch. There always had been a football pitch there where the prisoners played, and we actually had a game on that field with George Weah and with Abedi Pele. It was incredible afternoon.
The field where Nelson Mandela played his football.
Well, apparently he never played. He was he kept the score or something. But the famous Marikana FA was the football association that the prisoners had, and they had their own internal league. And they, of course, in subsequent years, after the book was written about it, have been actually given honorary FIFA membership.
Oh. Tim, you obviously can't top that, so should we just move on?
I can't even begin to match it. But I'm imagining Gleeson on the tennis court. I see Gleeson as a big serve and volley man.
Yes,
your big
absolutely.
Crashing serve and then getting up for the kill.
Nobody does
I don't see him
anymore.
running around and doing the big points.
No need for any skill, just bang him in.
Yeah, you see, nobody
That's
does the
right.
serve and volley anymore, apart from the English players. Serve and volley is played out now.
The only comparable story I've got, it's not even vaguely comparable. I did a TV show with Mauro Silva last month, I think. Mauro Silva, who played for Brazil so well in the 1994 World Cup, and he just had this fabulous pair of shoes on. And I'm into this kind of stuff. And I said, "Where are these shoes? Are brilliant. Where did you get them?" And he said, "Oh, they're Salvatore Ferragamo." And that's a brand and a half, So I said, I think that's a bit out of my price range, and he just didn't believe me. He said, "Oh, but Don, they're 800 quid a pop, those shoes. They're glorious shoes. And he just couldn't believe that I couldn't afford them. He said, but you're English. As if the streets of London are paved with Salvatore Ferragamo shoes.
Yeah. Gosh, man, that's the best you can do. All you can tell us is comparing shoe sizes with a former footballer. Whereas
you
Mark
sold one
comes
of your
on,
gold chains, you might be able to afford it.
Yeah, this is true. That's why he couldn't believe it, obviously. Yeah, but Tim, that is real gold you have across your neck, is it not? You got a ton of gold. Well, you did the Dutch accent, so I could do my South American. And I think we're quits on that. I think
you're becoming a player.
Yeah. As long as you don't do your black country. Oh, wait, by the way, the security guard that always tells me...
When Cleo's talking about Morocco bidding again and again and again for the World Cup, you just think about Birmingham's Olympic bids, over and over again. They always think they're going to win.
I'm not going to be able to leave this building now as a result of that.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
And we really aren't taking the mick out of black country accents. However, Dudley on the west coast of California in Oceanside, who is an Irishman living out there, would like to ask Tim if he could... perhaps read a soliloquy, Shakespeare. Why not Shakespeare? Because he comes from that part of the world, doesn't he? In the right accent.
What's the right accent to read a Shakespeare soliloquy in?
Well, he's from that part of the world that you talk about, the black country, isn't he? He's black.
Oh, right. He wants it in a Dudley accent, does he? No, enough. This is done with great affection. And
to be or not to be, that is the question.
That's the question. That's the question, isn't it?
Whether it be nobler in the mind.
No, stop.
Whether it be nobler in the mind. You started it. You're asking me to stop. You started it. Anyway, enough. So lots more questions here. Dennis in Grantham says... how do other World Cup qualifiers rate England in your regions? Mark?
Not very highly. I think England are always talked up essentially in your domestic media and not by many other pundits in around the world. The group's not bad. I mean, Belgium and England to go through at the expense of Panama and Tunisia, and of course, once you get into the knockout phases, and of course, it's an inexperienced and a fairly young side, and I think unburdened perhaps by some of the expectations of the past. But no, I think when the pundits, particularly here in Africa, are talking World Cup, they're certainly not mentioning England, I'm afraid to say.
How worried are they about England in South America, Tim?
Not particularly. I think that the key moment, the crunch moment, was in Gleeson's part of the world in 2010, because that was the time. I know the pundits were really going big for England in that tournament. Brazilian pundits, South American pundits in general, really going big, looking at the factors such as a winter World Cup, cold weather. A coach like Capello, victorious coach, everything seems to be lined up. And remember, England hardly played a good 10 minutes in that tournament. So that's the moment, I think, when the kind of hype bubble burst. So I haven't seen anyone refer to England as potential World Cup winners, although people have taken notice of the fact that there's something different happening, with England winning both the World Under-20 World Cup and in unbelievable style the World Under-17 World Cup. There is now a kind of a production line there going through the youth sides. So maybe in the future, certainly that Under-17 win, that won headlines. But too soon, I think, to affect England's chances in 4 months' time in Russia.
Fair question from Peter in Glasgow. Are new stadiums enhancing football culture or destroying it? In the last week or so, new stadiums have resulted in Tottenham announcing season ticket prices that rival Arsenal, and West Ham have seen crowd trouble as the club starts losing its stadium identity. Well, starts losing, hasn't really quite got it from the move from the Boleyn Stadium. In your region, can you see any of that, Tim? Football, new stadiums either enhancing or destroying the football culture?
Well, it's a difficult area, because football is really, really territorial, and that stadium that is your space. So if you're messing with that, you've got to get something in return for the loss of identity. I understand the anger of the West Ham fans, because they were promised something that is not being delivered. They were promised a world-class team in a world-class stadium, and they don't have either. Promises that were made about the stadium don't seem to have been delivered, and you get stuck with owners of the club, and that's a difficult concept. And the real guardians of the brand of the club are the supporters. They're not the owners. The owners are just temporary custodians. But those owners, they make key decisions. Understand the frustration. It can work though if that promise of a world-class team in a world-class stadium can be fulfilled, then you can certainly gain more than you lose. And the big example here would come from Europe. It would be Bayern Munich when they moved into the new Olympic stadium built for the '72 Olympics. I think it trebled their crowd. So that put them up to a whole new level, and then they started becoming a giant. If you go back 10 years previously, they weren't even the biggest club in Munich. And then 10 years after, they're by far the biggest club in Germany as a result of moving in to the new stadium. It's happening at the moment with Palmeiras. Palmeiras in São Paulo have, by common consensus, the best of all of the new stadiums that have been built in Brazil. It's built on exactly the same site as their previous stadium, so I suppose it's not leaving their home in that sense, although it is a completely new ground. And the stadium is great, the stadium is full, and the team are doing well because there's money behind it. But the problem comes when as a result of the move, you lose more than you gain.
And any experience of this in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the culture has changed as old rickety stadiums have been dismantled and new ones built. I think most of the change has been particularly positive. But you do have, particularly in South Africa, we have lost a lot of that, particularly in the township stadiums, that rabid atmosphere that made it such a draw card football in the 1970s and 1980s. But society has changed a lot too, and I think that also goes hand in hand with the structural developments has been the societal changes. But I think mostly in Africa, any stadium development must be seen as a massive positive, as an improvement, not only for the clubs, but for the surrounding community and society and village and town or wherever it is. So I think, we've perhaps lost a little bit of that edginess, that exciting edginess that we had in the stadiums is a little bit more gentrified. But most of the change with new venues has been massively positive as opposed to negative.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the societal change. I'm a stakeholder in the change in Tottenham as I'm the chairman of a major charity there. And it has to work together with Tottenham Hotspur as it develops its grounds. So I'm there much more regularly than I would like to be at the moment. And I went to the London School of Excellence the other day, which is part of the whole Tottenham Stadium development. Now, the whole neighbourhood is changing. It's a neighbourhood that I've known for 50 years. I'm literally seeing it change in front of my eyes. Not a bad thing, gentrification ain't a bad thing if everybody gets gentrified, but to a certain extent, I wonder whether the stadium and the football concerns lose sight of the other stakeholders, whether it be fans or otherwise, and local residents and so on. For example, the Tottenham Stadium is going to have a cheese room as part of its facilities. Exactly. Yeah. Cheese
Vickery's lot
room. Yeah. And we're not exactly France. Cheese room. You may as well say a cheese and biscuits room or whatever it were. And I wonder
that's for the hard cheese when we blow it again, isn't it?
Well, as long as you don't cut the cheese, we'll be happy with that. Now, have you come across any stadiums in your region that have included sort of somewhat bizarre aspects to them that maybe don't reflect what the fans are about and don't reflect what the neighbourhoods are about? Anything like that in Africa, Mark?
No, Not in Africa,
See,
no.
you're still laughing.
Yeah, no. I think that's a exclusively European experience. I'm sure.
Yeah, Tim, it's your lot that are doing it. Cheese rooms and everything. Anything like that in South America?
Yeah. Well, a little bit. I mean, the stadium in São Paulo that was built for the World Cup, which is now Corinthians Stadium, and it's an albatross around their neck. They can't afford it. It's a real problem for them. And there were little parts of that stadium. It might have been the marble or something. Little marble parts of the stadium where it was imported, specially from Europe. And you're thinking, well, why on earth? I mean, surely that could have been done. That could have been done cheaper. I am worried about because one of the things that's gone hand in hand with the new stadiums in Brazil is the prices going up, that's complicated enough in an English situation where the distribution of income is long way from ideal, and it's a long way from ideal, but it's still a lot better than it is in Brazil. So that's one thing that worries me with the new stadiums. Yeah, the quantity of people, the amount of people who you are pricing out of the stadium, which is obviously terrible for the game's soul. And the thing that most worries me is when the next generation of players are priced out of the stadium. When you read, for example, let's say a player's autobiography, and my favourite is Bobby Charlton, who it's just a fantastic he did two. He did my England years and my Manchester United years. The United one is better because there's more of a story to tell there. But he talks about going to games, even going to Scotland for because he comes from not far from the border for big games as a kid and watching games. And what would worry me now is that and all around the world, like the next generation of players being priced out of stadiums, because I think that's a terrible development.
You found
there is the compensation. There is the compensation of television, which Charlton certainly wouldn't have had in his day, and which the youngsters all have today.
Yeah. I suppose so. There is that complication, and things do change. You have to say you can't fight the change, can you? David in Glasgow. Well, maybe you can. David in Glasgow.
You can't fight the change, but you can certainly fight the cheese room. I mean, that's nonsense.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe they know something that we don't know.
No,
it might be hard cheese. It might be difficult to fight.
Imagine supporting a Ponzi side like that to the cheese room.
I know.
Must be awful. Your street cred is completely gone.
I know. It's gone if...
That's why that defence is full of holes.
Yeah, boom. Yeah, it's a Gorgonzola one.
Or a little Mickey Mouse, too.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be here all night, by the way, with these metaphors. David in Glasgow, good morning. Sorry, puns.
Good morning, how is everyone?
Very well, thanks very much. Good to switch you, mate. Yeah, you got a question for both Tim and Mark, I understand.
Yeah, basically, I was in Japan for the FIFA World Club Cup back in 2016. And I managed to get along to the semi-final between Atletico Nacional and Kashima, which Kashima
ruined by the video referee.
Yeah, that was actually the first time that I'd ever seen that in a stadium. Was that game? I didn't know what was going on because I had no internet access, so I wasn't sure exactly what was happening when that moment happened. But yeah, so I've started to kind of follow Atletico Nacional from there because I met a few other fans, and they were really, really good people, especially like a couple of weeks before what had happened. So yeah, and I've been trying to watch their games from over here in Glasgow, but I'm finding it really hard to kind of get access to the Colombian League and even the Copa Libertadores to watch the games. So just a question for both of you is, apart from like the Liga and the Premier League, what other leagues do they show in your countries? Like, do they show Japanese football? Do they show the Chinese league, especially with like players from either all nations going over there and playing? Apart from like the big leagues, what other leagues do they show?
Tim?
In Brazil, you get almost all of Europe. You get a little bit from Argentina, and now you're getting the MLS. The MLS has been shown. Not a lot from the Far East. The occasional World Cup qualifier, perhaps, from Africa. But the thing that's really missing from that is, with the exception of Argentina, is other leagues in South America. And Brazil can be very, very isolated in that respect. And we did have briefly, for about a year, we got one game from the Colombian Championship. And I think it's such a shame that that's not followed here in Brazil, because and the Colombian league is really, really interesting, and it culminates in playoffs, which are exciting. And I think if you gave, and there are lots of good players coming out of it as well, and players going on, some of them coming down to Brazil, others going straight to Europe. So that I think is my biggest complaint: the lack of coverage of South American leagues. You can see almost everything from the Premier League if you want. It's amazing. The blanket coverage of the top European leagues is extraordinary, but missing out on coverage from other South American leagues.
And in Africa, Mark?
Yeah, look, the Premier League is absolutely massive. And then there is a big push these days by La Liga. They've even opened office here in South Africa, in Johannesburg, to try and promote La Liga in the African markets. The Bundesliga is not far behind. You can watch a lot of that. Serie A, we have access to. Obviously, the French league is very big in Francophone Africa. And again, also, we get quite a lot of MLS too. If you want to watch it, it's always at a rather inappropriate time of the night, a bit like the World Football Show. But I would rather listen to Dotton and Tim than watch an MLS game, to be honest with you.
Well, that's very kind of you. I'm sure that was a compliment, wasn't it?
It was.
I'm just checking.
Backhanded, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm just checking. By the way, lots of comments on the Spurs cheese room. Paul suggests it's going to be more whiffy at Spurs than usual. Richard says Spurs need a hot pie room, not a cheese room. What's a football match without a burnt tongue? He's got a point there, actually. I don't know if I've been so well without burnt tongue.
That's from the chili sauce from a kebab on the high road, I think. So,
well, that as well, of course. That as well. Those kebab shops are still there, by the way. The best comment for the night is from Sarah in Great Yarmouth, who says, nothing wrong with having a cheese room at the new Spurs ground. It's going to be part of Delhi, as in Deli, Alley,
yeah.
Alley, yeah? Delhi Alley, yeah?
Very good.
Delhi, yeah. It's not bad, is it? At this time of the morning, I thought it was excellent, actually. This time of the morning. It won't get much better than that, unless you want to provide something. Okay, here's another question for you. More for you, Tim, I suppose. Thank you for all your wonderful insights throughout the years and being there for so many people so often. Yeah, thank you, Ben. Why are so many of the most influential managers in the modern footballing world from South America? What is it about the culture or region that forces them to innovate and or express themselves through football and to experiment with formations or styles?
Well, I think when he says South America, really means Argentina. That's the kind of crux of it. And it's such a football society. It's also a society that loves to debate, and that's handy. And also, which is also key, I mean, it's a society of Europeans. You know, as a famous writer once said, you know, the Mexicans descended from the Aztecs, the Argentines descended from boats. So it's culturally so close to Europe, and that means that the process of adaptation is easier. And Pochettino, the Tottenham manager, very successful Tottenham manager, says that, and he feels that he's considered a European coach and not a South American coach. You can't think of any Brazilian coach who's had an influence on top class European football for years and years and years. And Pellegrini came in from Chile and did well, but that's another one who passed through Argentina first. And I don't think he would have had the opportunities had he not passed through Argentina. Apart from that, I can't think of too many examples from elsewhere in South America, and perhaps Gaspoget, the Uruguayan, but Uruguay is very, very culturally similar to Argentina. So I think that probably explains it. Football, and it's a football mad country, Argentina. It's almost like a football republic, and football is endlessly, at even tiresome length, debated. And it's those debates that help form the ideas that help form coaches.
Africans love to debate too, though, Mark. How come we're not seeing any managers coming through from there? In that case, if we are to accept Tim's thesis.
Well, I think there's a bit of a bias against them. I think there's been a lack of opportunity. I think that'll come in time. There's certainly a lot of exciting young managers coming through. There's obviously, over the last 20 years, massive influx of African players into the European game, and a lot of those will eventually go on to management, I'm sure. But I think essentially, to be honest with you, it's been a lack of opportunity and perhaps a feeling that the Africans aren't going to bring you anything in the managerial role. And, you know, as with many other biases against Africa, that'll change in the coming years, hopefully.
Apparently there are some artisan cheesemakers in Tottenham N17, in case anybody's interested, yeah? Some artisan ones, so... yeah, it might all make sense in the end.
Respect all these people. Respect the bakers who are up at this time of the night, and respect all of these people are all artists.
Yeah, of course they are, and so are we. No, not that kind of artists. We're genuine artists. Come on now. I'm just anticipating. I'm anticipating what the comeback might be. You got to do that. Who is? This is from Ben. Who's the next manager? Following on from the other question, who's the next manager out of your respective panelist regions to look out for? I've got to go to you again, Mark. Anybody that might make the grade?
Yeah, I think Sunday Olise is leading the charge for Africa.
Former Nigerian international, of course.
Yeah, magnificent footballer, had scored that absolutely marvellous goal against Spain in Nantes in the '98 World Cup, and he's been living in Belgium for most of his post-football career life. He's done all these badges. He's never really got a decent opportunity, and then he got a bit of a break in the Dutch second division with a club called Fortuna Sittard, who were second from bottom when he took over, and within a year he had them top of the table and chasing for promotion. He's subsequently lost the job. It's been more an issue with the owners. They have a very eccentric Turkish boss there who I think likes to think that he's good enough to play, never mind manage. So it's been a very difficult job for Olise, and unfortunately he's no longer in it. But he's just the kind of profile of the African that I see making inroads in Europe, and already is, with what he's achieved in a year, I think he's opened the potential of a lot of doors for Africans. They might look back in 25 years and look at him almost as a sort of Herbert Chapman type or Rinus Michels type figure for African coaches.
And South American wise, is anyone to look out for?
There's one. My only fear with this fella is that he might not have enough time because he's already 57. But it's a great story. His name is Ariel Holan. He's Argentine. He's coach of Independiente in Argentina, which is a big traditional club. And the fascinating thing about him is he has a background in field hockey, and he was a hockey coach who then became a football coach. First with smaller clubs and now with Independiente. He's an absolute fanatic of Independiente. And you can see some of the things of field hockey, which is a very fast sport. The ball moves very, very quickly. You can see some of the things that he brings to Independiente on the field, and the way that he looks to achieve numerical superiority down the flanks. He's throwing lots of players forward, little triangles close to the byline. And he's a really, really interesting coach. But the only problem that he would have, I think, in terms of taking it to Europe and wherever, is the fact that because his background is in field hockey, he went into football coaching relatively late, and he's already late 50s.
Can either of you think of anyone from your regions? This is from Michael in London. Anyone from your regions who you'd consider, and this is, it wouldn't really happen, would it? You'd consider them to be world class, but they've never ever, made it onto the European continent, for example. Anybody in the last 30 years that you would consider world class that never left your continent? You're saying, Mark?
I think I've answered this question about 7. This will be the 8th time. Mohamed Abu Trika, the fantastic Egyptian footballer, just never. I think he eventually had a couple of seasons in Saudi Arabia, a couple of petrodollars in his account, but he would have been phenomenal on the European stage. He really was a classy midfielder, tall, elegant, glided with the ball across the field, fantastic shooting ability. But his real penchant was, this sort of ghosting in late into the penalty area and whipping home that cross while all the defenders were being dragged away by the other players. He really was a phenomenal footballer. Unfortunately, the Egyptian national team never got to the World Cup in his day. Although they dominated the African Nations Cup, they won it 3 times in a row with him and the team. But never went to the World Cup, and so the greater world never saw his skill, and he was a late developer. I think he really only came to prominence 25, 26 in Egypt, so there was no real chance of a transfer to Europe either. So I think the world certainly has missed out on him. But you ask anyone in the Arabic-speaking world about Mohamed Abu Trika, their eyes will light up.
And you've answered that question 8 times now.
I think. Well, we've had the question: who's the most famous footballer from your continent who has never made it to Europe? I'm sure 8 times. I could be wrong. It could be 9, Dotton.
Well,
could be 9 or 12.
Well, hang on a second. Let's try and break your record tonight. Let me ask the question again. Is there anybody you would consider to be... What? I'm just trying to help you out here, mate.
Yes, Mohamed Abu Trika of Egypt.
No, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure there's something from South America in a word, 2 words. First name and last name.
In one word, how about Pelé?
Yeah.
Last 30,
okay.
Before 1990, more players than you can shake a stick at.
I think we know who he is. Tim, thanks very much. Mark, many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
BBC 5 Live.